let's dive in. Gadi, thank you for being with us. And yeah.
All right, very good. Shalom, everyone. I hope that some of you are back for more from our last round. We're talking about the archaeology of the conflict, or trying to understand the issues of the conflict between Israel and its neighbors, and using archaeology as a tool. And I've mentioned this before, and today you'll hear it a lot. It's become a tool, archaeology has become a tool in the political arena and the narratives of Israel and the narratives of the states around us. So as an example, last week we showed the 5 shekel coin with the capital of a pillar from the time of the kings, King David and Solomon, that's used in Israel. And it's not by chance that we chose that coin. We want to connect to our ancient history. Rabbi, can you make me a co-host? We were so excited that we didn't.
Yeah, of course. Sorry.
So that we can share my screen.
Sorry, Gadi.
Almost. That's okay. So today we'll talk a little bit more. We finished last week in the Ezra and Nehemiah, or the coming back from the Babylonian exile, and that's where we'll pick up today. And we got a lot of action today. We got the Maccabees and the Greeks, and we got the Romans, and this crazy guy named Herod, who was the king. So a lot of good stuff coming up today. So hold on to your seats. Wow, look at all these options. Okay, hopefully I chose the right option. Okay, so here we are. We are going to start. Okay, maybe not. Hold on. We'll try it anyway. Technology is always good until it stops working for you. All right, here we go. So the archaeology of the conflict, and there's my email if anyone wants to email me and any questions. Rabbi has my email as well. So let's get on our way, and we'll talk a little bit about the time period. So just quickly to remind us, we started with the biblical period, Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebecca and all of those guys, 1000 BCE. You know, I think I probably said this to you, but we now have a new terminology and time frames in the tour guiding business. BCE is before the Common Era, and now we use BC, which is before COVID, and we're going to have AC, which will be after COVID, but I'm assuming that will be something later on. Anyway, 1000 before the Common Era, King David conquers Jerusalem and becomes the capital of the Israelite kingdom. 722, the Assyrians conquer the city and the kingdoms of Israel and Judea, and they exiled 10 tribes, and were left with the tribe of Judah and Simon, which is why we're all called Jews, descendants of Judea. And in 586, the Babylonians come in, they conquer the city, they destroy the temple, and they exile our people to Babylon. And there we sing some songs, on the rivers of Babylon. On the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept as we remember Zion, and eventually we come back around 535, led by Ezra and Nehemiah, and we'll talk about those guys in a moment. And in 332, Alexander the Grape, he's got a big grape on his head, conquers the area and it becomes Hellenistic. And in 167, we have the story of the Maccabees, Hanukkah, coming up very soon. And after that, which we'll talk about today, we have the Romans and a guy named King Herod that was appointed here, and eventually the temple rebuilt by King Herod, destroyed in 70 CE, and our people are exiled around the Roman Empire. And we'll touch a little bit on the next phase, which is the Byzantine rule, but that will probably be next week. All right, let's continue and dive into the actual archaeology. What are we going to see here? Oh, modern era, we'll skip on that. So the return from Babylon. So this guy is a guy named Cyrus. I think I mentioned him last week. He's a Persian king that essentially tells all of the people under his rule, not just the Jews, that they can go back and live in their countries. It was a political and economic decision. He figured they give better taxes if they are living in their own houses, in their own countries. And the Jews come back led by Ezra and Nehemiah. And what do we have in archaeology from Ezra and Nehemiah? The answer is not much, mainly because we know from the books, these are two books in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible. It's most of you probably never read them, and that's okay. But Ezra and Nehemiah are two leaders that bring our people, mainly the noble people from Babylon, and they come back and they rebuild the walls of Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. It's a very, very kind of disappointing temple. It's Second Temple version 2.0, because there'll be more updates soon. And one of the only things that we found from the time of Ezra and Nehemiah is this structure over here, which is in the city of David. Okay, if you remember last week, we talked about the monumental building, the stone step building that we think is the palace of King David, but we didn't find a sign that says, "Welcome to the palace of King David." Maybe that rings a bell. That's right over here, a little bit below. And above it was excavated this structure. And it's believed to be from the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. Why? Because we found some coins, first of all, from that time period, but mostly because here we found lots of bones of dogs. Oy vey. So what does that have to do with the story? We know that the Persians, Cyrus, the guy who let us come back, the Persians sacrificed dogs to their gods. So the assumption is that this is from that time period and therefore connects to Ezra and Nehemiah. And there was a tower over here. We can't see it from this angle, but I think I told you about it last week, that is also believed to be from that time period, perhaps one of the towers rebuilt by Ezra and Nehemiah. Now, Ezra is very important because Ezra was the scribe, the Kohen, the Sofer. One of the things that we found in this area are these bula, these little, they're about the size of a dime. They're made out of clay, and what it is a seal. If you have a scroll that you roll up and then it's in a tube, you put a couple of these wet clay on the edges, and then everyone would walk around kind of like the ring of the emperor, that you would make a seal in clay or in wax or whatever it is. And this would basically have names of people. And some of the people that appear here in these names are names that are mentioned in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah and the book of Jeremiah later on. So we know of these people. This is Ezra and Nehemiah rebuilding the temple. You can see a lot of it destroyed. What they were able to do was on a low budget. And Ezra does something very interesting. Ezra, the priest, the scribe, basically realizes that, I'm sorry, my dog is excited about somebody at the door. Ezra and Nehemiah realize that the people don't know their Bible anymore. Oy vey, they don't know their Tanakh. So what do? The story is that Ezra actually finds the scrolls of the Torah that were hidden when the temple was destroyed, and he institutes a tradition that on every Monday, Thursday, and Shabbat, there will be a reading of a portion of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. And this is, of course, the Torah portions that we know of today. They divide the Torah into 52 portions, and every week on Monday and Thursday, which were market days in Jerusalem, and every Shabbat, they would read from the Torah, and we still do that today, as you well know, in all of our synagogues around the world. Now, one thing that disappeared during the destruction of the first temple was the Ark of the Covenant, the Aron Habrit. We don't know what happened to it. There's a whole lot of conspiracy theories about it, all kinds of stuff. Here's a model of what, according to the scriptures, it should look like. And there's a guy that's looking for it still, this guy, Indiana Jones, because we don't really know where it is. So I put this here just to remind us that when Ezra and Nehemiah build the second temple, the first version of the second temple, there's no Ark of the Covenant anymore. Aron HaBrit is gone forever. We still don't know where it is. So all of the versions of the temple we'll talk about from now on do not have the Ark of the Covenant in it. So this is the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, about 530 BCE. And we're going to move forward to the Hellenistic period, or Greek. 332, Alexander the Great, he has a big grape on his head, conquers the area, and it becomes Hellenistic. By the way, there's a big argument. Here's more archaeology and politics in a different region. There's a country called Macedonia today, which most of its history was under Greek control. And Alexander the Great was actually Macedonian. And Macedonia is claiming Alexander the Great. They're saying he's not Greek, he's Macedonian. And the Greeks should not refer to him and talk about him, and he's ours. So just an example of how the archaeology plays into politics in other places. But here in this region, Alexander conquers vast empire. He dies at a young age, around in his 30s, and eventually his kingdom divided into 4 different kingdoms, 4 different people. And eventually, these four generals fight with each other, and we end up in the area of a guy named Seleucid. And the Seleucid III comes to Jerusalem, and he sends one of his generals by the name of Heliodopolus, we'll talk about him very soon, to the land. And this, of course, brings us to the story that we know about, which is the story of Hanukkah. So this place is also by the city of David. And by the city of David, this area is called the Givati parking lot. It used to be a parking lot, which is a good reason that they were able to excavate here. Because if you look at this, these are houses of a Arab village called Silwan near the city of David. And the reason that they were able to excavate over here like this in the open is because this was a parking lot. And what they found here is pretty cool. They found some interesting stuff. Let's see what we have in the pictures here. Lots of different structures from different time periods, including what we believe are the palaces of the Maccabees that rebelled against the Greeks and were essentially the first time in, or the last time, sorry, in many, many centuries and even millennia that the Jews had control over their own land. And you can see this is already a villa style of a building with pillars over here. And this is a reenactment of what it would have looked like. And you can see the direction that we're looking at. This is all essentially part of the excavations that are perhaps part of what the palaces of the Maccabees looked like. One of the challenges about the story of Hanukkah, yet again, is that we don't know, we don't have any archaeology from that time period, except for 2 places in the desert. One is Jericho and the other one is Masada, that were originally built by the Hasmoneans, the Maccabean kings. But let's go to a place where we have a very cool archaeological find that supports the story of Hanukkah. So some of you might have been here. This is where they do the dig for a day experience. And this is a very fun place because it's you go into caves. The locals lived above ground in houses like what you see here in the excavations, but all of their work was done below. Underneath they had essentially these basements. This hill is made out of very soft chalk, limestone, and they carved it out to provide shelter from the rain and the cold in the winter. And in the summer, it was nice and cool because it was in the shade. But that's a side story. You can see the city of Marisha. Marisha was a non-Jewish city during the time of the Maccabees. And it's believed that, and I'm sorry, I hope there are no children in the crowd here, because we all know the story of Hanukkah, that the Maccabee, you know what, I'll get to that in a minute. What we found here in this city of Marisha, and here's a view from the top of the tell. We are in the low hills in the Shfela, on the way from Jerusalem to Gaza, let's say, southwest of Jerusalem. And what we found here is this thing. This is a very cool stele or stela called the Heliodopolis stela. And this piece, you see how it's broken in a few pieces. This big piece was never found until, I'll tell you in a moment. This piece was found and was in the Israel Museum. And this piece was found in the excavations in Marisha, where we are. Now, what's interesting is that no one knew about this big piece. And it turns out that robbers came in the middle of the night, sometime in the early times of the state of Israel, and stole this and sold it to an antique dealer that eventually realized what it is and donated it to the Israel Museum. And remember, the museum had this piece and they put it together. And then when this piece was discovered, it was very exciting because we realized that it's part of this stela that was sold to the antique dealer. Now, why is this piece so important? Because this is very cool to begin with. It's a story about this guy, Heliodopolis, who is a general of King Seleucid III in Damascus, that was succeeded by a guy named Antiochus IV, the king that's involved in Hanukkah. And in this, it's basically a statement by Heliodopolis saying, we are going to raise the taxes and you crazy Jews have to pay taxes and you're going to put a statue in your temple. Sound familiar from somewhere? It's really the story of Hanukkah. And as you know, maybe you don't know, we have 4 books of Maccabees that didn't make it into our Jewish Bible. They are included in the Catholic Old Testament. And in it is the story of the Maccabees, the story of Hanukkah. But that is religious scripture. Here we have archaeological evidence of a story of the king from Damascus that's causing a ruckus here in the land of Israel, in Judea, because of raising the taxes and because of going and visiting in the temple and insisting to put a statue in the temple. So the fact that this piece was found in Marisha gave us an understanding of where this stela, where this entire sign came from, and was very, very important, very cool place. My wife started out as an archaeologist, Amy, and she worked here for quite a bit. And when you come to visit in Israel, you can still come and excavate here and hopefully find the next Heliodopolis statement. Okay, so before we go into the Second Temple period, I want to tell you, maybe I'll go back to Marisha Dafka. The Maccabees were not so great. They freed us from the Greeks, and Judah the Maccabee was a great leader, and all of those stories. However, the next generation took on the religion and the culture that their parents were trying to fight off. They changed their names to Alexander Jannaeus and Simon Aristobulus and John Hyrcanus, and basically became Greek. They forced the high priest to resign from his position and appointed someone from their family as the high priest. Why? Because all around in the countries around us, the king was also the head of the religion. And why would the king want to be the head of the religion? Because it has to do with money. Donations and everything that comes to the temple as offerings is controlled by the priests, or in this case, by the king. So unfortunately, these guys didn't do that great later on. And eventually in 63 BCE, the third generation of the Maccabees are fighting. 2 brothers are fighting each other. Who's going to be the rightful king? One of them sends a Facebook message to one of his friends who is a Roman general, a guy by the name of Pompeius, and he brings him in to fight his fight against his brother. The Romans are not stupid, and when they came in, generally without a fight, they killed both brothers and took over the land fairly easily, and we have the beginning of the Roman era. The Romans wanted to appoint someone who's local, and the emperor at the time was a guy named Julius. As you know, Julius Caesar, eventually stabbed and killed. He did not have any sons, and his nephew, a guy by the name of Octavius, takes over the kingdom. Octavius, by the way, changes his name later on to Augustus, but that's a whole other story. Octavius, aka Augustus, wanted a local king to control this place, and he remembered that he went to college with a Jew, a guy by the name of Herod. And he sends a Facebook message to his friend Herod, and he says, "Hey, Herod, buddy, what's going on? How you doing? I'm looking for someone to fill the position of king of the Jews." And Herod thinks for a second and responds, "You know what? Sounds like a great gig. I'd love to do it. But there's a problem. The Jews are not going to see me as the rightful king. I'm not a Maccabee. I'm not a descendant of King David. No problem," says Augustus. "I'll send you the 10th Legion." And in fact, Herod is installed by force by the Romans. Herod wants to make nice to his buddy Octavius or Augustus and make sure that he is in good relationship with the Romans. So what Herod does is he rebuilds Jerusalem, and this is a model in the Israel Museum of Jerusalem during the time of King Herod. Actually, I wanted to show you. He builds a very cool temple. Here's a model of it. We're going to look at it from different angles in different places now. But he rebuilds the temple. Now remember, the first version of the Second Temple, version 2.0, Ezra and Nehemiah, 530 BCE. The Maccabees, we don't know if they actually rebuilt or just rededicated the temple. The word Chanukah actually means dedication. It's even used in modern Hebrew today. If I buy a new house, I'll invite all of you over, even though you're pretty far, to a Chanukat Bait, a dedication of the new house. So perhaps they didn't rebuild. Today it's believed that they probably rebuilt the temple. So that would be version 2.1. And then Herod comes in and he says, "You know what? This is not big enough. I need more space up here at the top of the Temple Mount." And he builds these retaining walls that we see here to create a platform on top of which he builds this fancy temple, the building of the temple over here, the Holy of Holies towards the back. And of course, did the Holy of Holies include the Ark of the Covenant, Aron HaBrit? Trick question. The answer is no, it was not there. People do ask about this every now and then. And up here in this red roof building were two important functions of the people. One is the Sanhedrin, 90-something rabbis that were there as the Supreme Court of the people, debating Jewish law and Jewish issues. And the other function up here was the Knesset Gdolah, the large gathering of the people, 120 representatives, 10 from each of the 12 tribes. And we have the Knesset, the parliament of the people. Now, what's important to look at are these steps and these two entrances, because soon we're going to see the archaeological evidence that we have of this southern wall. This is the southern retaining wall. This is the eastern wall. And in a moment, we'll go see where the western wall is. But if we walk around here, you can see here's the city of David, the beginnings of Jerusalem. And this is very cool because we can actually walk around here from as if we were there at the museum. You can see here, this area is the beginnings of Jerusalem. This is the city of David that we talked about up until now. So David and Solomon's city was here. And up at the top was the temple, the first temple that Solomon built. But obviously, as time went on and the city expanded, you can see how big the city is and how much it expanded over here. So we're going to continue to go around here. Here's another view of the leaves of the tree that you can see of the temple once again. The temple and the area of the Temple Mount that still exists today. These towers over here, we're going to get close to them in a moment, is about where Jaffa Gate is. But don't be confused. All this entire area of Jerusalem today is outside of the walls, okay? The walls of today go from about Jaffa Gate to about the corner of the Temple Mount over here. So all of this is essentially outside of the walls of the city today. This is Mount Zion. I'm just throwing out some terms. Maybe some of you have been, get an idea of what this looks like. So let's come in here. What I wanted to show you here is the Western Wall. Okay, so this is the Western Wall of the retaining walls of the platform that is holding up the temple. And if you look very, very carefully, right over here, there's a little red flag. And if you don't see it, don't worry, we'll see it from other angles. Essentially, between these two towers is where the Western Wall of today is, where we actually go and put our notes in the Western Wall. And why do we put our notes there? Because we believe that even though the building is not here anymore, the presence of God is still here, the Shekhinah, and therefore God hears our prayers. It's a local call when you're there by the Western Wall. Okay, so now that we know what Herod built, let's go see what the archaeology actually can prove and show us. So here we are at the southern steps. And remember, we talked about these steps, or I showed you those steps in the model. And remember those two entrances. Okay, so here's one of them. Can you see the entrance here, the lintel? This is the top of a gate. They're known as Hulda gates. Why Hulda? The word Hulda is rat. And these were essentially tunnels that went underneath that red roof building that we described before and brought people up to the platform at the top where the building of the temple was. So that's one side. And the others are actually over here. It's a little hard to see them, but you'll see them. I have a picture in a moment. There are three arches here that are the other entrance to Hulda gates. But before we go see those, I want to show you these original steps of the entrance going up to the temple. These are very, very cool steps and very important archaeological find, because we know that in Judaism, we sing in Birkat Hamazon, the blessing for the food, every Shabbat. We add another song. Anybody remember what we sing, especially on Shabbat, on the Birkat Hamazon? We sing something called Shir HaMa'alot, the Song of Ascent, or the Song of the Steps. And there are about 25 different songs that start with those words, Shir LaMa'alot LeDavid, the Song of Ascent. As we were walking up to the temple, our people would sing this as they were bringing their sacrifice or their offerings to the temple before God. And you probably recognize it. Shir HaMa'alot Beshuv Adonai et Shivateinu. Anyway, I won't torture you with my singing, but these are the actual steps where our ancestors would sing these songs. Very cool. By the way, no, we won't get into that. So here's just a quick 1000 BCE. This is Solomon. In 20 CE, which probably is Herod, we have the walls, the platform. You see how there was a hill? And what Herod does are these walls, retaining walls, to build a big platform. And eventually in 70, it's destroyed. And today, of course, we have the Muslim temple on the top there, which we'll talk about in the next couple of sessions. So here's a view from the west, and the western wall is really this area over here. Okay, we actually found this arch that leads this bridge from the area where the Kohanim, the priests, lived in the upper city. They would have a bridge taking them directly into the temple. And this is called Wilson's Arch. We'll talk about it soon. And if you've been to Jerusalem in the Western Wall tunnels tour, which are not tunnels per se carved in the side of the mountain, but rather tunnels that go all along this wall, the Western Wall, underneath the built city of today. Why, by the way, is the Western Wall more important than the Southern Wall that we've exposed or the Eastern Wall? It's a trick question. The answer is that the building of the temple is not exactly in the middle of the platform. It was more towards the west. In addition to that, the Holy of Holies, the most sacred place, is in the back of the building. So the closer you pray to the Holy of Holies, the more brownie points you get. So this area, the Western Wall, is of course the most important for the people. So that's why the Western Wall is the most important. This area over here is known as Robinson's Arch. Let's take a look at Robinson's Arch. First of all, this is King Herod himself. And Robinson's Arch, here's from the model itself. Here's Wilson's Arch and the Western Wall. You see where the red flag is? That's more or less where we stand today. Because remember that 2,000 years have gone by and layers of history have gathered up here. But we definitely want to show that the Western Wall and the Southern Wall, for that matter, is part of the temple that Herod built. And look at this. These are those three arches that I showed you before. By the way, I have never been on the other side of this wall, but I have seen pictures. And this leads you into the El Aqsa Mosque, the Muslim mosque that's there today. And these tunnels, the Khulda tunnels, the tunnels where you feel like you're a rat coming through a tunnel, still exist. They're still there, and they bring you up to the top of the platform. 2,000-year-old structure still in place over there. Here's from the model what the Khulda gates would have looked like back way back then, and the steps that we talked about before. Okay, I'm going to stop here and see if there are any questions. Any questions before we continue? We're doing okay? Everybody's stunned?
It looks like the gates are covered with stone now. Was that a later development? I mean, you have these big arch, but then it's stone covers the whole entrance.
Yeah, the entrance is blocked because the Muslims have no need for that, for those tunnels. So they blocked them up. But you can see in the picture that some of the bottom of those arches are definitely Herodian stones from the Roman period. The Romans built huge, really big stones, and we can identify that they're from the right time period. So there's no real dispute about what those tunnels are, but they're not used today, and the Muslims want them blocked up because they don't want the Jews reenacting and going through there and coming up to the Temple Mount.
I have a question that I think
Yes.
Lauren said too. You said for the Knesset there were 120, 10 people from each tribe, but I thought the 10 tribes were lost before this.
Yes, correct. You're right. The number 120 comes from the desert after the people were fleeing from Egypt. Moses gathers 10 from each of the 12 tribes, so it's 120 representatives. You're right. At this point, it's already not representatives of each of the 12 tribes because they're gone. I usually say that to make the connection to that it goes way back over there. And by the way, I don't know if you know, but how many representatives are in the Knesset today, in the Israeli Knesset?
I don't know, 120?
120. Again, this is an important political statement. We're connecting the Knesset Gdola from the biblical story and from the temple in Jerusalem to the modern state of Israel using the same word, the Knesset, and using the same number, even though there's absolutely there's no regional representation. It's a sort of a random number, but it's on purpose connected to that story and those ancient connections. Excellent. Very good. Nancy is definitely listening to what I'm saying. You caught me there. Anybody else? Very good. So let's continue in our exploration over here. Ooh, okay. So what else can we see from Herod's temple? So this is a very cool spot. This is actually a place called Robinson's Arch, or the extension of the Western Wall. If we went and cut through this ramp over here, we'd be in the women's section of the Western Wall Plaza of today. We'd have to climb up as well, because I'll show you in a moment, we are standing at the street level during the time of King Herod. You can see here's the Roman street. These are shops where pilgrims would come and buy their animal for sacrifice. They would change their money, their local money, to the local currency of the temple, which is called a shekel. What's the Israeli currency today? Shekel. Again, not by chance. We want to connect politically to everything that was going on then. And what's interesting is that this arch coming out of the wall here, everyone see, we're right below it. There's a little piece of arch coming out here. This is known as Robinson's Arch. Now, Robinson, mind you, is not a common name during the Second Temple period in Jerusalem. So it's not named after its builder. It's named after an archaeologist, an American actually, Edward Robinson, that was in Jerusalem in the mid-1800s and identifies this little piece of arch. It's basically this piece over here from a description, a model that we knew about and the description of the temple that Herod built. Now, how do we know about the temple that Herod built? Because of two sources. One is the Christian Bible. And I've said this to a lot of people who sort of look at me weird. The Christian Bible, the New Testament, is a very important Jewish book. Why? Because in it are some amazing descriptions of the temple, what it looked like, columns, how big, different traditions and different customs that were going on there at the temple. So we have a lot to learn about Second Temple period from the Christian Bible. In addition to that, by the way, this place that we're looking at over here is very, very important for the Christian world, because there are several stories of Jesus visiting in the temple, and this is the temple that Jesus visited around the year 30 or so, CE at this point. And there's a story about Jesus getting angry at the money changers and overturning the money changers' tables. Maybe it was in one of these shops. There's lots of different interactions that we know about. The second source of information about this temple is a guy named Josephus Flavius. Josephus Flavius is a Roman historian, a Jew essentially, that turned himself over to the Romans. He's originally Yosef ben Matityahu, Joseph son of Mattathias. He surrenders to the Romans during the Great Revolt in 66 CE, and he becomes the Roman News Network correspondent in the Middle East, embedded with the Roman troops, and he writes a book known as The Wars of the Jews Against the Romans. And in there, he gives us amazing descriptions of the temple length and how high and how many columns are in there, and all kinds of different descriptions, very, very detailed, that allowed us to make these models. Here's the little bit of Robinson's Arch as well. And just so you understand what's going on here, you can see the pieces of Robinson's Arch that's pointed out. And a couple of interesting, this is a photograph from the early 20th century, 1900 something. And this is Robinson's Arch. And you see where these people are standing in this donkey. Here's a drawing from the 1880s. And look at this, street level is right where Robinson's Arch is. This guy is sitting literally on the Western Wall on Robinson's Arch, which is interesting because if you look here, how much dirt and gravel the archaeologists had to take out here to get to the level of the street. See where Robinson's Arch is here. These were excavations done in the 70s and 80s to expose all of the important archaeology over here. And of course, to get to this important layer for the Jewish people, we had to go through the Muslim layer that came a little bit later. And of course, that put us in some difficult times. Let's continue and see what else I brought here. I wanted to show you a place called Ezra Israel, which is, you see, this is Robinson's Arch over here. We were down here. You can see the street level very nicely. And this is a new section that's added in the Western Wall Plaza. It's known as the egalitarian section, where men and women can stand together, where a woman can have a bat mitzvah. As you know, the Western Wall Plaza is an Orthodox synagogue, essentially. So there's really, there's separation there between men and women. And this was added as a way to allow mostly non-Israeli Jews, because in Israel, Reform and conservative is almost non-existent, but many bar mitzvah and bat mitzvahs take place here, as well as down here. And there's an organization called Women of the Wall, maybe you've heard of them, that comes every beginning of the month to read from the Torah at the Western Wall Plaza. And here, it's the same Western Wall. This is actually a good picture of a man and a woman standing close to the wall without any mechitza or separation. And literally, if we went through this hill over here, we'd be in the Western Wall Plaza in the women's section. We'd have to go up a little bit and we'd be much, much higher than where we are now, because here this was excavated. One last thing that I want to point out is a very cool element that the archaeologists left here. They left these huge stones, and it was left on purpose because when they excavated here and they cleared this area, they found lots more of these stones. And what's amazing about these stones is that this is the destruction of the temple. Every year on Tisha B'Av, on the 9th of the month of Av, we mark the destruction of the temple. I always almost say celebrate, but it's really not celebrating. It's marking this, the destruction of our symbol. Essentially, this destruction of the Second Temple is the beginning of a change in the way we do Judaism even today. Because there's no more temple, the mitzvot that we have in Judaism, many of them relate to how to make a sacrifice at the temple, how many times to come to the temple, all kinds of things that are connected to the temple. And at this point, Judaism changes. It's a very important moment in the history of our people, and very important for us to relate to this as an important element. One other thing that I wanted to show you here, and I don't know if it'll let me, maybe not. Another important archaeological element that was found here, and these are pictures from the Southern Wall excavations. Here we found some more palaces of the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees. But what I wanted to show you, here's the destruction and the stones in Tisha B'Av. We found dozens of mikvaot. I know there's a picture here somewhere. Here we go. Mikvaot, or a mikveh. And these are industrial size mikveh. You see with a separation in the middle. Why is there a separation? So a lot of people usually say men and women. That's not the case. In this case, it was literally hundreds of people standing in line to immerse in the water, to cleanse themselves and become pure. And then on the way up, they would come through on this side to make sure that they don't mix with those who are still impure. Now, when we talk about the narrative and the argument between Israel and our neighbors at this point, the Palestinians and the Muslim world, this is a very important find. And the fact that we have not one, not two, dozens of these mikvaot all around the Temple Mount is support of the idea that the Jewish temple was in fact there, because we know that people who came on the pilgrimage 3 times a year, Rabbi, I'm almost finished, they came because in the Tanakh, in the Torah, it says that 3 times a year we would come to Jerusalem, to the temple, on Sukkot, on Pesach, and on Shavuot. And what you would do when you came on these pilgrimage, you would purchase an animal for sacrifice, change your money to the donation to the temple, to the shekel, and bathe in the mikveh and purify yourself before you walk up to the platform to the temple. So only the Jews were crazy enough to make these water holes, and these are identified as very Jewish evidence, which means that there was a Jewish ritual center here before. Okay, and my last picture, just so we can get to the continuation of next week, maybe not, so we have it here. All right, doesn't matter. The next week, we're going to talk about what happens after the destruction of the temple. There's another rebellion called the Bar Kokhba revolt, and we'll continue from there about the archaeology of the conflict. Yofi, so we still have a couple minutes if you have any questions.
And the next session, just so you all know, is 11:16, and then 11:30, and then 12:14. So we still have 3 sessions left to figure out everything we need to know about Israel.
Figure out who's who. Lawrence, yes, the northern tribes disappear in the Assyrian times. That's 720 BCE. You're correct. I see this. No, that wasn't in the beginning of the session. Any other questions, my friends? All right. Very good.
Thank you. Thank you. We will see you in 2 weeks, hopefully. And wishing everyone a wonderful day. Take a deep breath. And thank you, Gadi, for another wonderful session.
Thank you very much. It's great.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thank
Don't
you.
forget to vote, everyone.
Yes, yes.
Already
Thank you.
done. Done.
Yes. Thank you.